He looked at his wife's medical records and saw a burden. He looked at his mistress and saw a future. Dominic Bennett thought he was the king of the world, a CEO who could discard people like used tissues. He left his wife Charlotte alone in a cold hospital room to fight for her life while he took his lover to the Maldives. He thought she was gone forever. He thought he had won. But he never expected that 6 months later, the woman he left to die would walk into the gala on the arm of his deadliest enemy, looking more beautiful and powerful than ever before. Dominic was about to learn the hardest lesson of his life. Betrayal doesn't always end in tears. Sometimes it ends in war. The silence in the penthouse on West 57th Street was heavy enough to crush bones. It wasn't a peaceful silence. It was the suffocating quiet of a marriage that had been dead for years, even if the people inside it were still breathing. Charlotte stood by the floor-to-ceiling window, looking out at the rain slicking the Manhattan skyline. She was 32, but in the reflection of the glass she looked 50. Her skin, once the color of porcelain, had taken on a translucent grayish quality. The oversized cashmere cardigan swallowed her frail frame. She held a manila envelope in her shaking hand. The logo of Memorial Sloan Kettering Cancer Center was stamped in the corner. The front door beeped and unlocked. Dominic walked in. Dominic Bennett was a man who sucked the oxygen out of a room. Tall with sharp features and eyes the color of steel, he wore a bespoke suit that cost more than most people's cars. He was the CEO of Bennett Garrison, a logistics empire that moved half the freight on the East Coast. He smelled of rain-expensive scotch, and faintly, if you got close enough, perfume that wasn't Charlotte's. "You're home early," Charlotte whispered, turning around. She tried to smile, but her lips were dry and cracked. Dominic didn't look at her. He walked straight to the wet bar, pouring himself a drink. "Don't start, Charlotte. I have 10 minutes before I have to change for the charity dinner. I need peace, not chatter." "I wasn't chattering, Dominic. She took a breath, her lungs rattling slightly. "I got the results back from Dr. Evans today." Dominic took a sip of his scotch, checking his watch. "And another migraine, another phantom pain." "You're always sick, Charlotte. It's exhausting. I have a merger with the Kinsley Group on the table. Do you know what kind of stress I'm under?" "It's not a migraine," she said softly. She walked over and placed the envelope on the marble counter next to his drink. "It's stage 3. It's aggressive." Dominic paused. For a second, just a split second, his hand tightened around the glass. But then his phone buzzed. He glanced at the screen. A message from T. Wear the blue tie. "It brings out your eyes." The flicker of humanity in Dominic's face vanished. He pushed the envelope aside without opening it. "I can't deal with this right now," he said, his voice cold and flat. "I have to be at the Waldorf in an hour. We'll talk about your health issues on Sunday. My assistant Beatrice can schedule you in." Charlotte felt the room spin. "Schedule me in, Dominic. I need to start chemotherapy on Monday. I need you to sign the insurance release forms. I need my husband." Dominic slammed the glass down. "Stop being so dramatic. You have the best doctors money can buy. What do you want me to do? Hold your hand while they stick needles in you. I earn the money that pays for those doctors. That is my contribution. Now where is my blue tie?" He brushed past her, his shoulder knocking into hers. She was so weak, she stumbled, catching herself on the sofa. He didn't turn around. He marched up the floating staircase, disappearing into the master bedroom. Charlotte stood alone in the living room. Tears finally spilled over, hot and stinging. She realized then that she wasn't just fighting a disease. She was fighting a ghost. The man she had married 5 years ago, the man who had proposed to her in Central Park and promised to protect her, was dead. In his place was a monster who checked his texts while his wife spoke of dying. Upstairs, Dominic was tying his tie in the mirror. He dialed a number. "Hey, baby," he said, his voice dropping an octave, becoming warm and seductive, a tone Charlotte hadn't heard in 3 years. "Yeah, she's whining again. Some medical thing. Probably looking for attention because I've been busy. Don't worry. I'll make an appearance at the dinner, then I'm slipping out. Meet me at the hotel at 10. He hung up, sprayed on cologne, and walked out of the house without saying goodbye to the woman weeping on the floor. 2 weeks later, the reality of Charlotte's condition had set in. The chemotherapy was brutal. It felt like fire was running through her veins, stripping away her energy, her appetite, and her hair. She sat in the infusion center at the hospital, hooked up to a beeping machine. The room was filled with other patients, most of them accompanied by family. An elderly man held his wife's hand 2 chairs down. A young woman had her mother reading a magazine to her. Next to Charlotte, the chair was empty. It had been empty for every appointment. Her phone sat on her lap. She had texted Dominic 3 times that morning. Message 1, 8:00 a.m. The doctor says the side effects might be bad today. Can you pick me up at 2? Beatrice said the driver is busy. Message 2, 11:30 a.m. Dominic, please, I'm scared. Message 3, 1:45 p.m. Are you coming? There was no reply. What Charlotte didn't know was that Dominic wasn't in a meeting. He wasn't even in the office. He was at a boutique in Soho with Tiffany. Tiffany was everything Charlotte wasn't currently. She was 24, vibrant, loud, and demanding. She had been Dominic's executive assistant for 6 months before becoming his mistress. "Oh, Dom, look at this," Tiffany squealed, holding up a diamond tennis bracelet. "It matches the earrings you got me for my birthday." Dominic smiled, leaning against the counter. He handed his black card to the sales clerk. "Get it. Get the necklace too." Tiffany threw her arms around his neck, kissing him right there in the store. "You're the best. I love you so much. Is she going to be a problem this weekend? You promised we could go to the Hamptons house." Dominic checked his phone. He saw Charlotte's texts. He felt a wave of irritation. Why couldn't she just handle things herself? She was always so needy. "She's fine," Dominic lied smoothly. "She's staying with her sister in Jersey for a few weeks to recover from some flu. The house is ours." "Her sister," Tiffany laughed. "I thought you said she didn't have any family." "She doesn't," Dominic muttered, pocketing the phone. "I just said that to shut you up. Come on. Let's go get lunch." Back at the hospital, 2:00 p.m. came and went. The nurses began to give Charlotte pitying looks. "Mrs. Bennet," Nurse Sarah asked gently, "is someone coming for you? You're really too weak to take a cab alone." Charlotte stared at the read receipt on her messages. He had seen them. He just didn't care. "No," Charlotte said, her voice trembling. "My husband is detained. Important business." "I can call a medical transport," the nurse offered. Just as Charlotte was about to nod, a man walked into the infusion center. He was striking perhaps 40 years old, with dark hair graying at the temples and a tailored navy suit that screamed power, but in a quieter way than Dominic's. He held a bouquet of sunflowers, which seemed incongruously bright for the sterile room. He looked around confused until his eyes landed on Charlotte. He paused, shocked by her appearance, but he recovered quickly. "Charlotte?" he asked, walking over. Charlotte squinted. The drugs made her vision blurry. Adrian Thorne. He was Dominic's fiercest business rival, the CEO of Thorne Global. Years ago, before she met Dominic, Charlotte and Adrian had run in the same circles. They had been friends, almost something more, until Dominic had swept in with his aggressive charm and stolen her away. I heard you were unwell," Adrian said, his voice thick with genuine concern. He placed the flowers on the side table. "I bumped into your husband's assistant, Beatrice, at a coffee shop. She mentioned you were here. I didn't know it was this bad." Charlotte felt a flush of shame. She didn't want Adrian, of all people, to see her like this, bald, pale, and abandoned. "What are you doing here, Adrian?" "I came to say hello, and to see if you needed anything." He looked at the empty chair beside her. He looked at the phone in her lap. His eyes darkened. "Where is he?" "Charlotte." Charlotte looked down. Working, Adrian scoffed. "I just saw his check-in on social media. He's at Le Coucou having lunch." Charlotte's heart shattered. Le Coucou, her favorite restaurant, the place they went for their anniversaries. Adrian saw the devastation on her face. He didn't say another word. He pulled the empty chair closer and sat down. "I'm not leaving," Adrian said firmly. "You don't have to stay. We're competitors. If Dominic finds out..." "Dominic isn't here," Adrian interrupted, his voice hard. "And quite frankly, I don't give a damn about Dominic Bennett. I care that you shouldn't be sitting in a chemotherapy ward alone." For the next 2 hours, Adrian stayed. He didn't talk business. He told her funny stories about his golden retriever. He read to her from a book of poetry he found in the waiting room. He got her ice chips when her throat burned. When the treatment was over, Adrian helped her stand. She was so frail she almost collapsed. He scooped her up effortlessly, carrying her out of the hospital to his waiting limousine. "I'll take you home," he said. "No," Charlotte whispered. The thought of returning to that cold, empty penthouse, waiting for Dominic to come home smelling of Tiffany, was suddenly impossible. "Take me to a hotel, please. Any hotel." Adrian looked at her, understanding dawning in his eyes. "I have a guest house at my estate in Greenwich. It's quiet. There are nurses on staff for my mother who lives on the property. You'll be safe there." "I can't impose, Charlotte," he said, looking her in the eyes. "Let me help you. Please." She nodded, tears streaming down her face. As the car pulled away, Charlotte looked out the window. She took her phone, blocked Dominic's number, and turned it off. When Dominic returned to the penthouse 3 days later, hungover and smelling of Tiffany's cloying vanilla perfume, he expected a fight. He expected Charlotte to be sitting on the velvet armchair in the dark, weeping, waiting to guilt-trip him about his business trip. He had his excuses ready. He had a diamond bracelet in his pocket, an apology gift he'd bought at the airport duty-free store, a fraction of the cost of what he'd bought Tiffany, but enough to shut Charlotte up. "Charlotte," he called out, dropping his keys on the foyer table. Silence. He walked into the living room. It was pristine. Too pristine. The throw pillows were fluffed. The curtains were drawn. "Charlotte, stop playing games. I have a headache." He checked the kitchen. Empty. The refrigerator, usually stocked with his favorite sparkling water and organic fruits by Charlotte, was bare except for a jar of olives and a bottle of white wine. He went upstairs to the master bedroom. The bed was made with military precision. He opened the closet. It took him a moment to realize what he was seeing. Her side of the walk-in closet wasn't just messy, it was empty. The rows of designer dresses, the silk blouses, the winter coats gone. He pulled open the drawers. No jewelry, no scarves. On the vanity table where she usually kept her array of medications and creams, there was nothing but a single object, her wedding ring. It was a 3-carat solitaire diamond. He remembered buying it. He remembered thinking it was an investment in his image as a family man. Now it sat there like a cold, dead eye staring back at him. Dominic felt a surge of emotion. It wasn't sadness. It wasn't fear. It was pure, unadulterated rage. "You childish," he muttered, snatching the ring. He pulled out his phone and dialed her number. "The number you have dialed is not in service. Please check the number and try again." He threw the phone onto the bed. She changed her number over a missed chemo appointment. He paced the room. He assumed this was a power play. She was trying to scare him. She probably went to a hotel, or maybe she really did go to that non-existent sister in Jersey. She had no money of her own. He had made sure of that. Her accounts were joint, and he controlled the limits. He logged into his banking app to check for recent transactions. He wanted to see where she had swiped her card. A hotel. A flight account balance. $. Dominic blinked. He refreshed the page. There was a notification. Transfer authorized $2.4 million to the Charlotte Bennett Revocable Trust. She hadn't just left. She had taken exactly half of their liquid savings. She hadn't touched his investment portfolios or the business accounts, but the cash. She cleaned him out. "Beatrice!" Dominic roared, forgetting his assistant wasn't in the house. He dialed Beatrice's number. "Mr. Bennett?" Beatrice answered, sounding terrified. "Where is my wife? Did you book her travel? Did you authorize a transfer?" "Sir, Mrs. Bennett came into the office on Friday while you were away. She had a lawyer with her. Mr. Abernathy from the legal department said the prenup had a loophole regarding marital abandonment and distress. She signed the papers, sir. She said you were notified." Dominic sank onto the edge of the bed. He hadn't been notified because he had been ignoring his emails while lying on a beach with Tiffany. "Find her," Dominic hissed. "Find her and tell her if she doesn't come back, I will destroy her." "Sir." Beatrice hesitated. "We tried. She's gone. Her lawyer said any further contact must go through them. And she left a letter for you on your desk. Read it." I can't, sir. It's personal." "Read the damn letter, Beatrice." There was a rustling of paper on the other end of the line. Beatrice's voice trembled as she read, "Dominic, you looked at my cancer and saw an inconvenience. I looked at our marriage and saw a tumor. I have decided to cut out the rot to save the patient. Do not look for me. You are free." Dominic hung up. He looked at the empty closet. "Free," he said aloud. He looked at the wedding ring in his hand, then tossed it into the trash can. "Fine. You want to die alone? Go ahead. I have a life to live." He called Tiffany. "Pack your bags, babe," he said, forcing a cheerfulness he didn't feel. "You're moving in. The Wicked Witch is dead." 6 months passed. The penthouse on West 57th Street looked different now. The elegant, minimalist beige and cream decor Charlotte had curated was gone. In its place was Tiffany's taste bright neon art pieces, leopard print rugs and statues that looked like they belonged in a Las Vegas lobby. Dominic sat at his dining table, surrounded by takeout boxes. The house was a mess. Tiffany was somewhere in the back, FaceTiming her friends, her loud laughter grating on his nerves like sandpaper. "Dominic, babe," Tiffany yelled from the other room. "My card got declined at Sephora today. Can you fix it?" Dominic rubbed his temples. "I told you, Tiffany, the limit is $5,000 a month. You spent that in 3 days. But I need things being a CEO's girlfriend is hard work." She walked in wearing a silk robe he had bought for Charlotte. It looked wrong on her. Cheap. Dominic looked at her, really looked at her. 6 months ago, she was the fun, sexy escape. Now, she was a child. She didn't know how to host a dinner party. She embarrassed him in front of the board members by getting drunk on champagne at the quarterly review. She knew nothing about his world, and his world was crumbling. Bennett Garrison Logistics was bleeding. A new competitor had entered the market, Phoenix Freight. They were aggressive, efficient, and somehow they knew Dominic's moves before he made them. They were undercutting his prices and stealing his oldest clients. Dominic's phone rang. It was his CFO, Marcus Waite. "Marcus is banned. Let's use Arthur." "Arthur, what is it?" "It's 9 p.m. We lost the Kinsley account." "Dominic," Arthur said, his voice grim. Dominic stood up, knocking over a container of cold noodles. "What, that deal was locked? I played golf with Kinsley last week." Phoenix Freight swooped in. They offered a localized distribution hub in the tri-state area. It's exactly what Kinsley wanted, something we told him was impossible. "Who is running Phoenix Freight?" Dominic demanded. "I want a name. I want to crush them." "That's the thing," Arthur said. "It's a shell company owned by a holding group called Lazarus LLC. No public face, but they are backed by Adrian Mercer." "Mercer," Dominic spat the name. "Of course. He's been trying to buy me out for a decade. Dominic, the board is worried. The stock is down 15%. If we don't make a splash at the Metropolitan Winter Gala, next week there are rumors of a vote of no confidence." "I'll handle it," Dominic snapped. "I always handle it." He hung up and looked at Tiffany, who was picking at her nails, oblivious to the fact that his empire was burning. "We have a gala next Saturday," Dominic said coldly. "Buy a dress, a proper one. No sequins, no cleavage. And for God's sake, don't speak unless someone asks you a question." Tiffany rolled her eyes. "You're such a buzzkill lately. You used to be fun." Dominic walked to the window, staring out at the rain, just as Charlotte had done 6 months ago. He realized with a sinking feeling in his gut that Charlotte handled all the social networking. She remembered the clients' wives' birthdays. She organized the charity drives that made Bennett Garrison look benevolent. Without her, he was just a shark in a tank that was slowly running out of water. He wondered for the first time in months if she was even alive. Was she in a hospice somewhere? Had she passed away alone? He pushed the thought away. Weakness, he told himself. Regret is for the poor. The Metropolitan Winter Gala was not merely a party. It was a battlefield draped in silk and velvet. Held in the grand ballroom of the Waldorf Astoria, it was the night where the city's power players decided who would ascend to the throne and who would be cast out. Dominic Bennett entered the room with the desperation of a drowning man trying to hide his gasps for air. He needed this night. He needed to shake hands, flash his signature charming smile, and convince the sharks circling Bennett Garrison that there was no blood in the water. But he had made a tactical error. He had brought Tiffany. Despite his strict instructions to dress elegantly and quietly, Tiffany had arrived wearing a gown that could only be described as a scream for attention. It was a shocking shade of fuchsia, covered in aggressive feathers that shed with every step she took. It was tight in the wrong places and cut too low for the conservative crowd of old money investors. Wow, look at the size of that chandelier. Tiffany squealed, her voice cutting through the polite murmur of the room like a jagged knife. Do you think it's real crystal? Dominic gritted his teeth, feeling the heat rise in his neck. He felt the eyes on them. They weren't looks of envy, the kind he used to get when Charlotte stood beside him in her understated architectural gowns. These were looks of amusement, of pity. "Is that the mistress?" a woman whispered behind a fan near the entrance. "Tacky. Absolutely tacky," her companion replied. "I heard he left his sick wife for her." Disgraceful. Dominic steered Tiffany roughly toward the open bar, desperate to distance himself from her. "Stay here," he hissed, forcing a smile for a passing senator. "Get a drink. Do not move. Do not speak to anyone unless they ask you a direct question." Tiffany rolled her eyes, popping a canapé into her mouth. "You're such a buzzkill lately, Dom. You used to be fun." Dominic turned his back on her, adjusting his tuxedo jacket. He scanned the room, his eyes darting frantically. He needed to find Mr. Kinsley. He needed to beg for the contract back. He needed a lifeline. He was halfway across the room when the atmosphere shifted. It happened instantly. One moment there was the cacophony of 100 conversations and the clinking of silverware. The next there was silence. It started near the grand staircase and rippled outward like a shock wave. The orchestra faltered the cellist's bow, hovering in mid-air. Dominic frowned, turning toward the staircase to see what had commanded such sudden reverence. At the top of the marble steps stood Adrian Mercer. He looked every inch the titan of industry, dressed in a midnight blue velvet tuxedo that fit him like armor. But no one was looking at Adrian. Every eye in the room was fixed on the woman whose hand rested lightly on his arm. She wore a gown of liquid emerald silk that seemed to pour over her body, catching the light with every breath. It was backless, daring, yet regal, revealing skin that was creamy, flawless, and glowing with vitality. Her hair, which Dominic remembered as thinning and brittle the last time he saw her, was now a thick, lustrous cascade of chestnut waves resting on one shoulder. She stood tall, her chin tilted upward with an air of absolute terrifying confidence. Diamonds, tasteful, heavy, and undeniably expensive, glittered at her throat and ears, catching the fire of the chandeliers. Dominic froze. The champagne glass in his hand slipped from his fingers. It hit the marble floor with a sharp crash, shattering into 1,000 pieces. He didn't hear it. He couldn't hear anything over the roaring of blood in his ears. It was Charlotte. But it wasn't the Charlotte he had left in the penthouse. That woman had been a ghost grey frail shrinking into her oversized cardigans, smelling of medicine and fear. This woman was a queen. She was radiant. She was powerful. She was alive. "No," Dominic whispered, his face draining of all color. "That's impossible." Next to him, Tiffany crunched loudly on an ice cube, oblivious to the seismic shift in the room. "Who is that?" She thinks she's all that walking down like she owns the place. Dominic shoved Tiffany aside, stepping forward as if in a trance. He watched as Adrian leaned down and whispered something to Charlotte. Charlotte looked up at Adrian, and a genuine warm smile broke across her face, a smile Dominic hadn't seen in years. She squeezed Adrian's arm, and together they began to descend the stairs. The crowd parted for them like the Red Sea. Dominic stumbled forward, ignoring the glass shards crunching under his expensive Italian shoes. He had to know. He had to be close to her, to ensure this wasn't a hallucination brought on by stress and vodka. "Charlotte," he choked out, his voice cracking. She didn't stop. She and Adrian moved through the crowd, greeting people with the grace of royalty. Dominic scrambled to intercept them near the large crystal fountain in the center of the room. He blocked their path, his chest heaving, his hands shaking. "Charlotte!" He barked, his old arrogance trying to claw its way through his shock. "What is this? You're supposed to be dead." Charlotte finished the sentence for him. Her voice was the final blow. It was smooth, rich, and stronger than he had ever heard it. She looked at him, not with hate, not with anger, but with a cool, polite indifference that chilled him to the bone. "I'm sorry to disappoint you, Dominic," she said, her eyes locking onto his. "The reports of my demise were greatly exaggerated. But the cancer—" Dominic stammered, his mind unable to reconcile the image before him with the medical reports he had ignored. "Stage 3. You were dying. Remission," Adrian Mercer interjected. He stepped slightly in front of her, his stance protective, his eyes hard as flint. "It's amazing what the right doctors, a stress-free environment, and a partner who actually gives a damn can do for a woman's health." Dominic glared at Adrian, the jealousy flaring hot and ugly in his chest. You hid her." "I saved her," Adrian corrected coldly. "I did what you were too busy to do." "Dominic, please," Charlotte said. She reached out and brushed a piece of invisible lint off Dominic's lapel with mocking gentleness. "You're causing a scene, and you know how much you hate drama. Go back to your assistant. She seems to have spilled red wine on her feathers." Dominic grabbed Charlotte's wrist. The contact sent a jolt through him. She was warm. She was real. "You are my wife," Dominic hissed, his voice low and menacing. "You come home with me. Now! We are leaving." The temperature in the immediate vicinity seemed to drop 10 degrees. Adrian's hand shot out, gripping Dominic's wrist with crushing force. "Let go of her," Adrian said. His voice wasn't a shout, but a low growl that vibrated with dangerous intent. "Or I will break your arm right here in front of your board of directors." Dominic winced, the pain in his wrist sharp. He looked around. Everyone was watching. Phones were out. Cameras were flashing. He released her hand, backing away slightly, rubbing his wrist. "This isn't over," Dominic hissed, trying to salvage a shred of dignity. "You think you can just walk in here and humiliate me? I am Dominic Bennett." Charlotte laughed. It was a dark, melodic sound that made the hair on the back of his neck stand up. "Oh, Dominic, you have no idea," she said softly. "By the way, I've been meaning to introduce myself properly." She took a step closer, her emerald dress rustling like the wings of a predatory bird. "Have you met the CEO of Phoenix Freight?" Dominic frowned, confusion clouding his rage. "What?" Charlotte placed a hand on her own chest, her eyes gleaming with triumph. "Nice to meet you, Mr. Bennett," she whispered. "We've been enjoying taking your business. I hope you liked the localized distribution hub idea. It was one of my old designs." Dominic's world went black. Phoenix, rising from the ashes. She wasn't just back. She wasn't just healthy. She was the invisible enemy that had been bleeding his company dry for 6 months. She was the architect of his ruin. And as she took Adrian's arm and walked away, leaving Dominic standing in the wreckage of his own life, he realized with terrifying clarity she was winning. The days following the Metropolitan Winter Gala were a blur of humiliation that tasted like ash in Dominic Bennett's mouth. The photos of Charlotte, radiant, powerful, and hanging on Adrian Mercer's arm, were not just on the society pages. They were everywhere. They were the wallpaper of his nightmare. Dominic sat in his corner office on the 45th floor, the blinds drawn tight against the grey Manhattan morning. The room, usually a hive of aggressive energy and constant phone calls, was tomb-like. The silence was deafening. His phone, which typically rang every 3 minutes with deal offers or sycophantic check-ins, sat on the mahogany desk like a black brick. When it did ring, it was never good news. It was creditors calling in loans. It was board members demanding emergency meetings. It was the sound of rats fleeing a sinking ship. He stared at the copy of the Wall Street Chronicle spread out before him. The headline was bold, cruel, and impossible to ignore. Phoenix Rising. How Charlotte Bennett reinvented herself and crushed her husband's empire. Dominic swiped the newspaper off the desk, sending it fluttering to the floor. He reached for his coffee mug, his hand shaking slightly, and topped it off with a generous pour of vodka from the crystal decanter he usually saved for celebrating mergers. "It's a fluke," he muttered to the empty room, the alcohol burning his throat. "She's nothing without me. She's just a prop Mercer is using to get under my skin. I can fix this." A knock at the door shattered his monologue. "What?" Dominic snapped, not looking up. Arthur, his chief financial officer, stepped into the room. Arthur was a man who usually carried himself with the arrogance of someone who knew where the money was buried. Today he looked like he had seen a ghost. His skin was pasty, and sweat beaded on his upper lip. "Mr. Bennett," Arthur said, his voice tight, "we have a problem. A catastrophic problem." "What now, Arthur?" Dominic leaned back, feigning a nonchalance he didn't feel. "Did we lose another client? Did Kinsley pull the rest of his portfolio?" "I told you I'll get Kinsley back on the golf course next week." "It's not Kinsley," Arthur said, closing the door behind him and locking it a gesture that made Dominic's stomach drop. "It's the SEC. They notified our legal department 20 minutes ago. They are launching a full-scale audit of Bennett Garrison." Dominic froze. "On what grounds our books are clean? You made sure the books were clean." Arthur walked to the desk, lowering his voice to a whisper. "They aren't looking at the domestic books, Dominic. They received an anonymous tip. Someone sent them the unredacted files from the offshore accounts in the Caymans, the shell companies, the tax evasion schemes. The ones you swore were untraceable." Dominic felt the blood drain from his face, leaving him cold and dizzy. The room seemed to tilt. "That's impossible. Those drives are encrypted with military-grade security. No one has access to those servers except me." "And your wife," Arthur said. The words hung in the air, heavy and suffocating. Dominic's mind raced back 5 years. In the early days before the cancer, before the mistress, before the cruelty, Charlotte had been his partner. She was a brilliant data architect. She had built the digital infrastructure of his company. She had created the encryption keys. She had set up the safety protocols. He had assumed that when she got sick, the chemo had fogged her brain. He assumed she was too weak, too soft, and too broken to ever remember, let alone use that information. He had underestimated her. He had looked at a sleeping tiger and mistaken it for a rug. "Get out," Dominic whispered. "Dominic, we need a strategy. If they have those files—" "I said get out," Dominic roared, throwing his coffee mug at the wall. It shattered, spraying dark liquid over his framed awards. As Arthur fled the office, Dominic grabbed his coat. Panic, cold and sharp, clawed at his chest. He couldn't fight a war on 2 fronts. He couldn't handle the business collapse and a federal investigation. He had to stop the bleeding at the source. He had to see her. He convinced himself as he rode the elevator down to the garage that he could still manipulate her. Charlotte had loved him once. She had worshipped him. She was emotional, sentimental. If he could just get her alone, away from Mercer's influence, he could break her down. He could play the victim. He could make her feel guilty. It had always worked before. He drove his Aston Martin to Adrian Mercer's estate in Greenwich like a madman, weaving through traffic, the rain hammering against the windshield. He rehearsed his lines. I messed up. I was scared. I did it for us. The Mercer estate was a fortress of limestone and ivy set back from the road behind imposing iron gates. It screamed old money and security things Dominic was rapidly losing. He smashed the buzzer repeatedly, his patience fraying with every second of delay. Finally, the intercom crackled. Mr. Bennett. The voice was cool, detached. It was Adrian. I was wondering when you'd show up. You're predictable, if nothing else. Let me in, Mercer, Dominic shouted into the speaker, rain soaking his hair. I need to speak to my wife. You can't keep her from me. Ex-wife, Adrian corrected effortlessly. The divorce was finalized in absentia while you were unavailable. But come in. She's expecting you. The heavy gates swung open with a groan. Dominic parked haphazardly in the circular driveway and stormed into the house. He was led by a silent housekeeper into the library, a massive room lined with books and smelling of cedar and wood smoke. Charlotte sat by a roaring fire in a high-backed leather wing chair. She looked nothing like the woman he had abandoned. She was wearing a soft white cashmere sweater that made her look angelic, yet unreachable. Her skin was glowing, her eyes bright and clear. There were no dark circles, no tremors. She held a cup of tea, looking the picture of serenity. Adrian stood behind her chair, one hand resting protectively on her shoulder, a silent sentinel. Charlotte. Dominic started dropping to his knees on the Persian rug. He decided to play the only card he had left, pity. He let the desperation seep into his voice, turning on the tears a performance that had won him boardrooms in the past. Charlotte, baby, look at me, he pleaded, crawling slightly closer. I'm a mess without you. Look at me. The company is falling apart. The feds are circling. I haven't slept in weeks. Charlotte took a slow sip of her tea. She didn't look at him. She watched the flames dance in the hearth. I know I made mistakes, Dominic continued, his voice cracking. I was scared. When you got sick, I didn't know how to handle it. I panicked. I ran because I couldn't bear the thought of losing you. I'm a coward. I admit it. But I love you. We built that company together. Don't destroy our legacy out of spite. Our legacy? Charlotte asked quietly. She finally turned her head, her gaze landing on him with the weight of a sledgehammer. You mean your legacy? The one you built on my unpaid labor. My family's connections, and my code only to discard me when I became inconvenient. I never discarded you. Dominic lied, the fabrication tasting sour on his tongue. I was working. I was killing myself. Working 18-hour days to pay for your treatments, to pay for the best doctors in the world. Charlotte set her teacup down on the side table with a sharp clink. The sound echoed in the quiet room. I checked the logs, Dominic, she said. Her voice wasn't loud, but it was steady, stripped of all the fear he used to rely on. The day I was admitted to the ICU for sepsis, the day the doctors told me I might not make it through the night you weren't working. Dominic opened his mouth, but she cut him off. You weren't at the office. You weren't at a client dinner. I accessed your credit card statements and the GPS data from your car. She revealed, her eyes narrowing. You were at a jewelry auction at Sotheby's. You bought a vintage Rolex for $40,000, while I was lying in a bed with tubes down my throat, wondering if I would ever see the sun again. You were bidding on a watch. Dominic choked. The lie died in his throat. It was an investment. And the day I left, she continued, her voice rising slightly, shivering with suppressed rage. You didn't even notice I was gone for 3 days. You brought that girl into my home, into my bed. I saw the security footage, Dominic. I saw you laughing with her in the kitchen where we used to make breakfast. I was lonely, Dominic screamed, scrambling to his feet, his mask of contrition slipping to reveal the narcissist beneath. I'm a man, I have needs. You were always sick, always tired, always complaining. It was depressing. I needed to feel alive. And I had needs too, Charlotte shouted back, standing up. She towered over him in that moment, fueled by a year of suppressed agony. I needed my husband to hold my hand while I vomited from chemo. I needed you to tell me I was still beautiful when my hair fell out in clumps on the pillow. But you looked at me like I was a rotting piece of meat. You looked at me like I was already dead. She took a deep, shuddering breath, composing herself. She reached up and placed her hand over Adrian's hand on her shoulder. Adrian didn't care about the scars, she said, softly, the anger melting into something warmer, deeper. He didn't care about the sickness. He sat by my bed for months in this house. He held the bucket when I was sick. He wiped my face with a cool cloth at 3 a.m. He learned how to cook macrobiotic meals because my stomach couldn't handle anything else. He loved me at my worst. You only loved me when I was a trophy you could put on a shelf. Dominic glared at Adrian, hate radiating from him in waves. He's using you. Can't you see that he's a shark? He just wants my company, and he's using you to get to it. Adrian stepped forward, moving in front of Charlotte. His voice was calm, dangerous, and utterly controlled. I don't need your company, Dominic. I have my own, and it's worth 3 times what yours was at its peak. And as for Charlotte, she is not a merger acquisition. She is the love of my life, and I will spend the rest of my days making up for the hell you put her through. Dominic laughed, a manic, broken sound that bounced off the bookshelves. This is touching. Really. A fairy tale ending. But you can't destroy me, Charlotte. You don't have the guts. I know where the bodies are buried too. If I go down, I'll drag you into the mud with me. Do you? Charlotte smiled. It was a cold smile. A terrifying smile. She picked up a sleek silver remote from the table and pointed it at the television mounted above the fireplace. I don't think you understand the situation, Dominic. She clicked the button. The screen flared to life, tuned to a 24-hour news network. The red banner at the bottom of the screen read, Breaking News. The anchor's voice filled the room, grave and urgent. We are receiving reports that the FBI has just initiated a raid on the headquarters of Bennett Garrison Logistics. CEO Dominic Bennett is officially wanted for questioning regarding large-scale embezzlement, wire fraud, and tax evasion. A whistleblower has provided federal agents with over 5 terabytes of incriminating data, including audio recordings of Mr. Bennett discussing the laundering of funds. Dominic stared at the screen. His mouth hung open. The recordings. The voice memos he used to send to himself to keep track of his lies. the ones stored on his private cloud. "You synced my phone," Dominic whispered, the horror washing over him like ice water. "How?" "I'm the one who set up your cloud account. Remember," Charlotte said, her voice smooth as glass. 5 years ago, you never changed the password. You were always so arrogant, Dominic. So sure that you were the smartest person in the room." She took a step closer to him. "Dominic King 1, she recited. "You never even added a special character." Dominic backed away, stumbling over the edge of the rug. He looked from the TV screen, showing agents carrying boxes out of his building, back to the woman he had underestimated. "You're a witch," he hissed, trembling. "You're crazy." "No, Dominic," Charlotte said, sitting back down and smoothing her skirt. She picked up her tea, dismissing him entirely. "I'm not crazy. I'm just a woman who finally realized her worth. Now get out of my house before Adrian throws you out." Dominic looked at Adrian, who was already stepping forward, fists clenched. Dominic turned and ran. He ran out of the library, out of the house, and into the rain, leaving his life, his legacy, and his wife behind in the warmth of the fire. Dominic Bennett didn't go to jail the night the FBI raided his empire. He vanished into the cracks of the city he once thought he owned. For 3 weeks, the man who had dined on caviar at Le Coucou lived like a rat. He bounced between cash-only motels in the seediest parts of New Jersey, watching his life disintegrate through the static of cheap television sets. The news cycle was relentless. Every hour brought a new revelation of his fraud, a new interview with a betrayed investor, or a fresh humiliation. Even Tiffany had turned on him, selling her story to a tabloid for $50,000, painting him as a monster who had forced her to cosplay as his dying wife. He had lost his assets. He had lost his reputation. He had lost his name. But in the festering quiet of room 104, Dominic's mind began to fracture. He couldn't accept that he had lost her. It was impossible. Charlotte was his creation. He had molded her, funded her, saved her. The narrative that she was an enemy combatant didn't fit into the architecture of his ego. So his mind built a new reality. He convinced himself that Charlotte was being held hostage. The coldness she showed him at the gala, the audio recordings, the lawsuit. It was all a script forced upon her by Adrian Mercer. She was crying out for help in code. She needed her husband to save her. She needed her king. On a bleak, rainy Tuesday, Dominic saw a news ticker announcing that the final dissolution of Bennett Garrison would be signed at the federal courthouse in Manhattan. He knew he had to be there. He arrived hours early, lurking in the shadows of the courthouse pillars. He looked nothing like the CEO who had graced magazine covers. His trench coat was and smelled of damp wool and sweat. His beard was overgrown, patchy and grey. His eyes were bustled, darting back and forth, burning with a feverish, manic intensity. Around noon, the heavy oak doors opened. A phalanx of lawyers emerged, followed by the main attraction. Adrian Mercer walked out first, holding a large black umbrella. Under its shelter walked Charlotte. She looked breathtaking even in the gloom of a rainy New York afternoon. She wore a sharp cream trench coat, her hair pulled back in a sleek bun. Her face the picture of calm, dignified victory. The paparazzi swarmed instantly. Flashbulbs exploded like lightning. "Mrs. Bennett, is it true you're taking over the logistics contracts? Mr. Mercer, is this a merger?" Dominic felt a surge of adrenaline. They were blinding her. They were scaring her. He had to intervene. He broke from the crowd, shoving past a photographer. "Charlotte!" His voice was a raw, jagged tear in the atmosphere. He lunged at her, his filthy hands grabbing her pristine sleeve. "Charlotte, it's me!" Security guards moved instantly, but Dominic's grip was fueled by hysterical strength. He wouldn't let go. "Get off me!" Charlotte cried out, stumbling back. Her eyes went wide, not with recognition, but with terror. "It's me, Dom!" He screamed, his face inches from hers. He smelled of decay. She smelled of rain and freedom. "Don't listen to them, baby. We're going to the Maldives, remember? Just you and me. Forget the doctors. Forget the chemo. You're not sick anymore. You're perfect." Adrian slammed into Dominic, his shoulder hitting Dominic's chest with the force of a battering ram. He knocked the fallen CEO onto the wet pavement. "Don't you touch her!" Adrian roared, standing over Charlotte like a shield. Dominic lay on the cold, wet concrete. The rain plastered his hair to his skull. He looked up, blinking against the water dripping into his eyes. He started to laugh. It wasn't a laugh of humor. It was the sound of a mind finally snapping the tether to reality. "She's mine!" Dominic shrieked at the grey sky, kicking his legs as the police officers swarmed him, pinning him to the ground. "She's mine! I bought her! I paid for her life! I signed the checks!" The cameras were rolling, capturing every second of his degradation. "Look at her!" Dominic yelled to the crowd of photographers, struggling against the handcuffs. He pointed a shaking, muddy finger at Charlotte, who was trembling in Adrian's arms. "She's my wife. She's waiting for me. Tell them Shah. Tell them about the blue tie. Tell them I'm the..." The officers hauled him up. He was panting his chest, heaving a wide, terrifying grin plastered on his face. He locked eyes with Charlotte. "Tell them," he whispered, pleading now. Charlotte straightened her coat. She looked at the man she had once worshipped, the man who had left her to die alone in a hospital room. She didn't see a monster anymore. She saw a pathetic, broken creature, a ghost. She looked him dead in the eye, her voice steady and quiet, cutting through the rain. "I don't know who you are." She turned away, taking Adrian's arm. They walked toward their waiting car, without looking back. Dominic stopped fighting. The fight drained out of him, replaced by a void. As the police dragged him toward the squad car, he didn't scream about his lawyer. He didn't ask for his rights. He simply closed his eyes and began to hum. It was a low, off-key melody. Da-da-da-dum. Da-da-da-dum. He sat in the back of the police cruiser, rocking back and forth, humming the wedding march to himself, lost in a memory of a day that no longer mattered, a king reigning over a kingdom of nothing. Dominic Bennett spent the rest of his days in a state facility muttering about mergers that would never happen, and a wife who had long since moved on. He learned too late that loyalty isn't a transaction, and love isn't a depreciating asset. He thought he could break Charlotte without consequences, but he forgot that the strongest steel is forged in the hottest fire. Charlotte didn't just survive. She transcended. If this story hit you in the feels, hit that like button and don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications. Have you ever seen karma come back around like this? Tell me your stories in the comments below. Until next time, remember, be careful who you betray. They might just become the architect of your downfall.